Darrin Hagen is with us today. And I'm so excited to see you, Darrin. It's been so long. Thank you so much for joining me here today. I'm Sabrina Samuel. I'm with the Central Alberta Pride Society. I'm new to the society, but I'm not new to Darrin. We've known each other for quite some time, and he actually hails from close to here. That's why we've chosen him, obviously, because he's also a celebrity. I've known Darrin since back in the day when he was on Access TV. And Darrin, I just wanted to ask you first out, how are things in Edmonton?
Things in Edmonton right now are, it's a weird and troubling time to be an artist right now. Here we are in Pride Month, knowing that there will be no parade and probably very few Pride celebrations. Feels like the whole world is kind of shut down. I feel very privileged that for the most part, I'm keeping busy and creating new work, even though I'm not getting paid for it. And I have a garden to keep me busy and, a dog to keep me happy and a husband to be with. But I'm certainly glad I'm not going through this alone. That's for sure.
Sounds lovely. So I guess where I wanted to start in terms of your history was in our backyard here.
Just so you know, backyard, speaking of backyard, my dog just ran in and he's about to start barking. So I apologize to everybody.
No worries. No worries. It's Zoom life, right?
Exactly.
If you want to introduce us to your dog, that's all good too.
I won't be criticized for my backdrop being too bland or something.
We get to see it all here on the Zoom.
Exactly. So yeah. You had either just asked a question or were just about to ask a question. Sorry.
Yeah. So I just wondered, if you could share with us a little bit of your history here in the region and kind of what it was like for you being growing up gay in Central Alberta.
Absolutely. Well, I grew up in a trailer court in Rocky Mountain House. So I went from kindergarten to high school. I was in Rocky Mountain House. Graduated in 1982. I actually just shared a graduation story with Mark Connolly from CBC a while ago because everyone's all, the grads of 2020, they don't get to have a party this year. And it made me think back to my grad in 1982. And, I actually, even back then I was a show off. I wanted to play piano. I wrote the theme song for our grad. It was called Dreams Never Die. And I performed it at the actual graduation ceremonies. But after the ceremonies were over, I was too afraid to go to the party because of the threat of anti-gay violence. And so I didn't go. I skipped my own grad party and ended up hanging out with a friend in my backyard in the camper, listening to Donna Summer music and coming out to each other. And so that's how I spent my graduation night. It was weird. I've never seen most of those people again. So it's a strange thing. I remember in grade 12 being pulled into the high school gym and they showed us this movie that was all about, these are the best years of your life. You're going to miss this so much. And all I could think of was, no, I won't. It hasn't been the best years of my life. I had a very charmed life in Rocky in a lot of ways because I have a lot of privilege. I grew up in a household that gave me the tools to move forward. I was allowed to, learn music
lessons. Yeah.
Music lessons. I got decent marks, a fairly God-free household, if I can say that. So I didn't have that sort of fire and brimstone baggage weighing me down, but we're talking about, the Bible Belt of Alberta. And so my family and my experience was probably the exception. Growing up in Rocky was awesome in a lot of ways. It's a beautiful town and I had a lot of really good friends, but it took me years to realize that I spent most of my life in terror because you never know when the bullies are going to be around the corner. You never know. And so your whole life became about avoiding conflict wherever you went from kindergarten to grade 12. So for 13 years straight, I had to always be careful about who was sitting behind me, who was walking behind me in the hallway, which hallway I went down. And I know that in the high school, when it got particularly onerous and what's the word I'm looking for? I don't want to say violent because it wasn't violent, but it was scary. It got particularly scary in high school because our high school was designed in such a way that there was a certain corridor you had to go through to get to the other wing of the high school, and that's where I call them the dickheads. The bullies would hang out there and harass whoever went by. And I was one of the people that they loved to harass. I had great teachers. And I also had teachers that were completely terrified of me. So it's this weird push and pull. The whole Rocky Mountain House experience for me and the whole Central Alberta experience for me was one of the bliss of growing up in such a beautiful place, surrounded by some really amazing people, but also knowing that the violence and the danger was never very far away if I let my guard down. And it wasn't until I became an adult that I finally got to let go of a little bit of that.
So I think for the young people that will be watching this, it would be nice to sort of explore how you sort of touch on it in your book, The Edmonton Queen. This beautiful sort of depiction of you leaving the city leaving for the city with your accordion, you know, that small town. I'm out of here.
High heels.
So I think probably, you know, we have these romantic notions that when people liberate themselves from sort of stifling environments where they feel they don't belong, that everything magically works.
Right.
How was that transition for you?
Well, I mean, part of it was true. I came to Edmonton. I started going to a bar called Flashback, which is where I met all the people that would change my life. And that's where I lived the life that ended up becoming that book. And I ended up becoming a drag queen, a drag performer, a drag artiste. And that changed my life forever in ways that I can't even begin to describe. It put me into a very privileged position of being able to view the world from the outside, which is something that as an artist I think is a really valuable tool. I might be making a really nice glass of wine out of some sour grapes here when I say that, because you have to take the negatives and turn them into positives. So take the outsider status and turn it into something that allows you to see what other people cannot see. But even that was flavored by, like, I moved here in 1982. In 1983, we started hearing on the news about this new gay cancer that they were talking about. And of course, everybody knows that I'm speaking of AIDS and the plague of the 80s. And so, yeah, I graduated in 82. I moved here a few weeks later. And by 83, we started hearing that life was about to get dangerous again. And by about 1985, people started dying around me. And I'm a survivor of that. And that is another experience that completely, it made me view the world in a completely different way, because it's interesting right now watching the COVID response versus the response to AIDS when it happened. These were both pandemics and they were both deadly to our very existence. But back then, because it was gay men and prostitutes and junkies that were dying, no one did a thing to stop it until it became apparent that it wasn't just going to stay in those communities. And
Wow.
in the meantime, so I always say that a virus caused AIDS, but the plague was caused by homophobia and inaction, because they could have stopped it. They could have acted in a more urgent manner, and instead they allowed it for a while until it was in the blood supply, and suddenly it started to take down heterosexual celebrities, and then everybody woke up, and suddenly it was this public health crisis, right? So it's very interesting to watch the difference in the response between this pandemic and the one that happened when I first became an adult. I would say that getting away from the small town was something that I had to do at the time. It was so important to get to a place where I could be around people like me. I have to admit, as I get older, I feel like I need my community around me a little less. And I actually dream of being able to go back to a small town and having a house and being able to support myself by just writing again. I think that would be, I miss the landscape. I miss the peace and quiet, you know? So yeah, I still have a lot of strong feelings for the town I grew up in, because it's where I became who I am, right? And so
I totally relate.
Yes. Yeah, and you can't divorce yourself from that. I mean,
No.
you can leave for the big city with your accordion after grade 12. You can take the boy out of the trailer court, but you can't take the trailer court out of the boy.
Breathe.
Yeah. So even now, when I drive up and down Main Street, when I go down to visit mom and dad, I get this feeling of, it's this contentment of realizing you're home again, mixed with the sadness of knowing that it wasn't very good the first time. But by that same token, I had a lot of people that looked out for me, and a lot of people that opened me up to really amazing opportunities. You know, my music teachers, some of my instructors in high school, the people who knew what I was going through helped me through that, right? And sometimes invisibly. Sometimes it wasn't until decades later when I went, oh, wow, just by not being a jerk, that person helped me so much.
Wow.
I'll tell you a little story. I actually have My grade 10 English teacher lives in Edmonton. And until I moved into this place where I am doing this interview from, I actually lived over on 99th Street, and she lived not far from me. So we would run into each other as I went to buy cigarettes or whatever. By the way, I quit smoking this year. That's news.
Oh,
Oh,
congratulations.
that
That's
later.
huge. That's huge.
It's totally huge. I've been smoking since I was 16. So anyway, I would run into this teacher and we would chat about Rocky and about, she was a big theater fan, a big Shakespeare fan. So she would often see my work. And it was after about running into her about 4 or 5 times in Edmonton where I went, she was one of those people that always made me feel safe in her classroom without ever making a visible effort. She just allowed me to be me and never criticized that. And just so.
And isn't that remarkable, a chance for a kid like to have that safety in such an environment where you're so different, right? That's
Absolutely.
I
And
mean,
it's
that
not
is love embodied, really, right there.
absolutely. And this is in the time where you wouldn't find a rainbow sticker on a safe classroom. All those symbols and signals that we use to sort of identify a safe space now, they didn't exist back then. So the only way that you could find out a safe space was to enter it and to be you and to see what happened. And I had a few teachers that were not happy with having me in the classroom. And it wasn't because I wasn't a good student, because I was a kick-ass student, right? It was because I made them uncomfortable. I got kicked out of my physics class because I was trying to make someone laugh, and it was in a kind of a gay manner. And so I got kicked out, like just like that, done. No discussion. No, don't beg to come back. You're out. And that happened, not that specific thing, but there was a few classes where I knew that I had to basically pretend I wasn't there. Do your work. Don't say anything. Don't draw any attention to yourself.
Yeah.
And I think the hardest part about growing up in a place like Central Alberta is the forced invisibility that you sign up for.
Mm-hmm.
And you do it voluntarily out of safety, and you don't think it's a big deal at the time. But years later, you go, oh, the amount of times that I didn't speak up, or the amount of times that I was afraid to just be me. Like, what's the cost of that? The emotional cost? We'll never really know, right?
Huge. I don't know what your experience was like, if you had to fake it, like if you always had like a little girlfriend
Oh,
or.
I had so many girlfriends, and they weren't girlfriends. They were like girlfriends. It was interesting because a lot of the girls that I was really good friends with would hang out with me, and we would drive up and down Main Street of Rocky Mountain House in my dumpy old car. And a lot of them were actually dating the assholes. Oh, sorry, I said I wouldn't swear. A lot of them were dating the bullies that were problems for me, right?
Yeah.
So I actually used my friends as a bit of a buffer, because as long as I was a friend of theirs, I would be spared the worst of it. And here's the thing: I gotta be clear about this. I'm a tall white male. There were people who were in far worse situations than I was in that town at that time. And I can think of one person in particular, a friend of mine, who was, even more obvious, even more effeminate, and how, even I was afraid to hang out with him. Even I, as a gay person, was afraid to be with that gay person, because he was so obviously gay that would just bring more attention to me. And these are the kind of things that you sort of wonder, is like, how many friendships was I not able to have because of that,
Right.
Stuff like that. Yeah. So I did date girls when I was in high school. I even came out to one of my girlfriends. That's the first time I came out, was to one of my girlfriends. And then finally I found a girl who I actually asked her out in grade 8. This is my friend Shannon. I hope she doesn't mind me telling this story. I asked her out in grade 8. I was totally smitten with her. And she was like, well, I have a boyfriend, who was much older. And I had no idea, of course, because I was so clued out. But her and I ended up taking piano lessons from the same teacher and competing in the Kiwanis Festival together. And we ended up becoming kind of like Stevie Nicks and Lindsey Buckingham of Rocky Mountain, teenage version. And so we would perform at concerts and stuff like that. And she and I would watch Dynasty, because back then, remember, Dynasty had like one of the first bisexual characters on TV.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yes. One of the blonde sons in the Dynasty, the Carrington sons, was a queer character, one of the very first ones on primetime television. So we would watch that and talk about him and eat popcorn and
that sounds lovely.
The first time I ever did real drag makeup, she was probably the one that did my makeup. So
beautiful. And I just really have to say, Darrin, when I met you, you were a mermaid in the Edmonton Street Performers Festival, Winston Churchill Square fountain, I believe.
Oh, in the fountain, or was I
In
on
the,
top of the? What was I on top of the ticket booth with kids teasing me?
oh, it could have been that. It could have been that. But I
There,
remember maybe it was a photo shoot that you did outside
that could have been.
in front of the fountain. But I just remember asking you all these pedestrian questions and you being so sweet about it, you know, because you were the first actually openly gay man I had had interaction with. Like I was
Really?
19 years old when I met you. And I know, like, what rock was I living under? I'm
I have,
from a
I have,
small town too.
I have a visual aid for all
Oh, mermaid.
the. That's the mermaid
You,
tail she's talking about.
gorgeous, gorgeous. You know, that's one thing I love about your book is that you know, there's so many photographs
There
of
are
great performers. Yeah. Have you ever performed drag in Rocky or Red
no,
Deer?
no. Red Deer, yes. Red Deer, yes. A few years ago, we actually took Tornado Magnet to the Prime Stock Theater in Red Deer, and we did Tornado Magnet there, which is fun because Tornado Magnet is actually about the trailer court outside of Rocky Mountain House that I grew up in. So people that actually had lived in the trailer court or knew what I was talking about, they were there to, some of them were there to see the play. The Tornado Magnet is about my mom, basically. It's about growing up in the trailer court. And then we went back a year later, a year or two later, with my play Bitch Slap, which is all about Betty Davis and Joan Crawford. And
Okay.
I think those are the only two productions I've done in Red Deer. I've never done a show in Rocky Mountain House. I mean, not since I left. No, and never a drag. Well, actually, no. Wait. In grade 11 and 12 drama class, I did drag for the big, huge variety show both years.
Very
No,
cool.
just the second year. Just the second year. Yeah, I actually did Donna Summer.
Awesome. You're
Yeah.
looking at Stevie Wonder from
Oh
grade
my
8.
God, are you serious?
I was
Awesome.
Stevie in We Are the World. It was
That's
pretty fun.
that's pretty awesome. That's pretty
Yeah, it
awesome.
was a good time. So I want to ask you two more questions. First of all, what is your biggest professional accomplishment, Darrin?
Oh,
And how has that impacted the gay community?
my biggest profession. My what did you say? My biggest professional accomplishment?
Yeah.
It's so weird because the things that are important to me are not the ones that hit big with the public or the other way around, right? The
Hmm.
ones that seem really impressive are kind of like, and yet I'll tell you, like just becoming a drag queen in Edmonton and making a living
Yeah.
at that for 30 years, I still am not sure how that worked, but I'm so glad it happened because it
Me
did change.
too. I mean, you are an icon. You paved the way for so many.
I have to give credit where credit is due. There are many people who paved that road for me before I got there.
Oh,
It's just that I got more famous than they did. Like that's the only difference. Like I think of all the queer artists that came before me that didn't have the same privilege that I do of just the time that I was so lucky. I was so damn lucky. I had one foot planted in this era where queer people did not have human rights, and now I have one foot planted in an era where equality looks like it might someday happen, depending on how long this government stays in power. That's a very privileged time to be alive, and I think of all the people I know that didn't get to live that long, that didn't get to see gay marriage or get to see queer people embraced or get to see Trudeau's apology to the LGBTQ community. Moments like that, I'm so glad I got to be alive for it and so proud to be part of that. Right. And so for me, when I think about accomplishments, I think every person that lives a life out of the closet in this province is accomplishing something so gigantic that it's hard for me to sort of frame what I do as any different or better or more important than what they do.
you're so humble. Thank you for that.
Now look at us. We're such softies. Look at us.
Whew. And I guess finally, what I'd like to finish off here before you have to run off to the dentist is I'd like to know what your message would be to little Darrin, maybe in Rocky Mountain House or Rimby or wherever. What would you say to that little guy that's really struggling?
Wow. I would have to say be patient, even though it seems like the hardest thing in the world to wait for fairness and justice. It will arrive eventually. And your instincts are right. The rest of the world is wrong. That's what I had to sort of hold. That's what I had to hold around me when I was a kid, which is like I would look up what I wanted to know and realize, so I'm not the one that's viewing this wrong. It's the people around me. that need to catch up. And so just know that the people around you, they have progress to make and they have learning to do as well. You might be ahead of them on some things, and especially with this thing because you're experiencing it. And so I would just say be patient, because eventually either they will catch up and understand you, or you will be offered the opportunity to move to a place where people will understand you. And it's a waiting game. It's a waiting game, and it's a hard one, but it was worth it. And I have to tell people also, come out, because whatever hell and pain I went through since I came out of the closet, nothing is as bad as being in the closet and having to lie about who you are.
I think anybody, not just the gay community, but if you are lying about who you are or incongruent with your values, your life gets real hard, real fast. And now more than ever, we all need to stand in our own truth.
Absolutely. I also want to say to young Darrin, who I'm assuming is living right now, it's a metaphor. I lost my train of thought. I'm sorry. I also wanted to say, be aware of the privilege of the moment that you're in. That's so important. And even though I grew up in the 70s, I had to be aware of the privilege of the fact that I didn't grow up in the 50s. Like, learn your queer history, learn from the people that sacrificed before you, so that you could sit here today and say, I want to be part of a GSA, or I want to marry my same-sex spouse. Someone died for those things to happen. Someone put everything on the line, including their life, so that you could enjoy that. And it's hard for us to wrap our heads around that, because our commonality doesn't have borders, like in national borders. Like the queer nation is bigger than Canada or America or any one country, right? And so it's hard for us to think in those terms. But you need to be aware.
Love is bigger than all of that.
Yeah, well, and you need to be aware that not only do we have a queer nation, but we have had our soldiers, and they have made that sacrifice for you, so that you could be alive today, and to just take that privilege of being alive in this moment, and to know that your job as a young queer person is to make it better for the people that come after you.
Darrin, I'm so touched by this conversation today. It's going to help so many people.
Hope so.
And I really believe education and advocacy is the way through.
Yep.
So thank you. Thank you for all you've said.
Thank you for this.
Okay. Now, I don't know how to stop recording, but I'm going to try.
We're newbies here.